Live from Montana and Oklahoma, this is the EdTech Situation Room. My name is Jason Neifer. I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the State Virtual School in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And I'm also the NCCE Tech Ed Savvy Administrator, and this is episode 11 of the EdTech Situation Room. Joining me, as always, is Dr. Wesley Fryer. Good evening, Wes.
Good evening. I am happy that we're not getting severe weather here. It just seems to be I heard the director of the National Weather Center here in Norman talk today because he has a child at our school, and he showed the graph of tornadoes in Oklahoma. And yes, May was hitting the ceiling. So it's been an exciting month. There's probably more to come. And I am the director of technology at Cassidy School. Thrilled to be here with the Yoda of EdTech News, Jason Neifer.
Well, let's see if I could bring any Yoda-ness to the Situation Room tonight. So
that would be the Yoda who has not seen Yoda. So we learned that last time. Yeah.
Actually, and we're doing sharing facts about ourselves each time, right? So I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
I'm heading off to Canada this weekend for the long weekend, and I'm excited to get out of town. My wife and I are going to just take a little road trip and head over the border. We're about 3 hours away from the Canadian border here in Missoula. And so we're going to head to southern BC for the long weekend. So we're excited to be getting out of town.
Awesome. That is great. And my personal fact will just be that my wife and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary yesterday, and our son graduated from high school on Tuesday. So it is a momentous week.
And by the way, I did enjoy the 1990s Wes photos you posted on Facebook. So it's like, oh, look, it's 90s Wes. So
yeah, well, the photo albums are right down here. And truth be told, I couldn't find our wedding pictures. We never made an album with our wedding pictures. My wife's like, yeah, they're in a shoebox. So yeah, and she said tonight people didn't recognize her because her hair is now gray. So anyway, yes. I don't think I got in too much trouble putting those pictures, but there's a number of photos in these albums I could put online that would probably discredit myself as well as others. So
yeah,
there you go. Those are our.
I'm kind of glad I didn't go to college during the Facebook era. So because there are a lot of photos of me back then that I'm glad are staying somewhere in the analog world. So.
Absolutely. So for those of you joining us, we are, I don't know what we call that little corner, but it's sort of the oblique fact of non-tech news that we're throwing in each time. But we are going to be talking about tech news. And if you're listening to this either live, as we have Peggy George joining us, we're so excited to have your support, Peggy. Or if you're going to join us after the fact, we have all of our links on edtechsr.com/links. And we probably have fewer links tonight than we have, but that's probably good because, some days we have a ridiculous number. And we've been off for 2 weeks. So I was in Chicago week before last, I guess, with my wife, who spoke to 1,000 PBS broadcasters, and I got to carry her luggage and arrange for airport transport. And have you been traversing the friendly skies as well lately, Jason?
I've not, although it's going to change this coming summer. So I think my wife and I have been kind of looking at the calendar, and I think I'm going to be traveling more weekends than I will be home this summer. So yeah, it's good. I like to be busy, so I pretend otherwise sometimes, but I like to be busy. So
awesome. All right.
So why don't you get started, Wes, with a link for the week?
All right, sounds good. Well, let's just start at the top. I do love listening, by the way, to a podcast called Clockwise, and they are done in 30 minutes, and they've got a great format. And in fact, we're a bit, partially an inspiration for what we're doing here. And on their latest show, they were talking about the Google I/O, which I kind of think we're going to talk about a little bit. I saw your Geek of the Week, and we've had the Amazon Echo for a while, but now we have other virtual assistants joining the fray. I don't think I put the link in, but actually Apple announced that they're going to have a similar kind of device powered by Siri. And we also have Google entering it. But the article from The Verge, which was back on May 9th, says the creators of Siri just showed off their next AI assistant, Viv, and it's incredible. And that was mentioned on the Clockwise podcast. And as they talked about as well, Siri hasn't really evolved a ton since she, he, it, whatever, came out, and a lot of times sends you to web searches. And it's fascinating to me to listen to my kids in the car generally try to interact with Siri. And one of the things they're trying to do is really get a conversation going, but get that response, not that one time, tell me this fact or open this app, but, follow on. And so evidently this new AI assistant, Viv, has some of that potential to be able to have context. And if you ask something and then you ask something else, I guess, to tie it together. But virtual assistants are going to just, and we've been talking about it, artificial intelligence or AI on the show before, they're just going to continue to improve. And the vision of the future that I've read about and heard about is this, cloud-based vision, essentially, where the AI intelligence is on supercomputers that are not on your device, but your device is connected to the cloud, and it can access that. And on the one hand, I'm a little nervous about it because I heard another article or read another article recently that the NSA will neither confirm nor deny that they have hacked the Amazon Echo. And basically they probably have. And if you have one in your house, the potential is it's, the Internet of Things is my house is hackable because most of this is being designed without security in mind. So you could have hackers listening to your every word and recording those, by having a device like this. But I know that this is an important part of the future. I know you've seen Star Trek. All right. You said you were a Trekkie last time. So, Picard on the bridge and, being able to, yeah, that's right. Live long and prosper. Being able to, I'm using voice to text a lot when I'm sending text messages. And so that's speech to text. It's different. But anyway, it's a big part of the future. How about you? Do you have the Amazon Echo now? Will you be embracing the virtual assistant, in your home, Jason? And what do you think about this in terms of the future and I guess schools specific?
Sure. Well, and as we've talked before, this is the crux of my dissertation research, and I don't want to go too much into that because we're still working on the design model and such, and at some point I'll probably talk about it a little wider. But I do think that this is an incredibly important topic, and the perspective for me, and I should say I do not have an Amazon Echo. My wife is part of the reason why I don't have an Amazon Echo. I've kind of pitched it jokingly, and it's kind of landed with a thud. But I think there's something to this. But I think part of what you have to frame this perspective from is what the purpose of those devices are in context of who's releasing it, right? So for Google, it's to keep you in their universe, right? Like everything goes back to search, which of course to advertising. In the Microsoft universe, I think it's a little harder to figure out where it goes, although they have a search engine, so you can presume that's similar for Microsoft as it is for Google, keeping them in the Microsoft universe. But then when you start to talk about Amazon, Amazon, of course, like they've been really smart in that they've made so many kind of conduits of information between the Echo and various apps and services to make it very functional. And then, oh, by the way, you can order things from Amazon on the Echo, which then becomes obviously the purpose of that. It's a bigger struggle for me of what's in it for Apple, although I think the context of all the articles is correct, that Siri has been somewhat stagnant for the past 12, 24, 36 months. And what I think is potentially exciting is that as Google and part of Google I/O, which we're going to probably talk about a couple of times today, a couple of weeks ago was announced evolution of Google Now, which is their voice service. And Google Now will be able to hold, as you suggest, Wes, conversations and be able to remember questions from time to time. I think all those pieces could push I guess the 4, and then if you take this Viv product, the 5 ecosystems that exist for voice and keep pushing them forward until maybe 2, maybe 3 emerge as the dominant ones. But I think this has a huge potential for education, especially when it comes to individual students. We spend a lot of time, I think, talking about how search and the internet and its vastness kind of changes the nature of education because of the need for data, and that data need is less because of that. I don't think that the promise of that has really been met in classrooms because search is still pretty complex and a lot of kids aren't very good at it. In fact, I know of some research that specifically says that there's been colleges and that have done studies about their own incoming freshmen about how bad they are at Google searching, despite their insistence that they are very good at it and can use that for education. Whereas a voice assistant that is smart, that could ask you questions back or be able to provide facts could be a very powerful way of introducing search in a sensitive, contextual way for students in a classroom environment. So I would say these are, coming to a user or a school near you or a student near you. Peggy in chat asked how they're measuring students not good at search. The study, I'm going to now say college and probably be wrong. Maybe it was Kent State. I'll need to look more specifically, but they brought students in and interviewed them, grabbed some qualitative data on what they perceived their searching ability to be, and then had them conduct basic searches for information on Google. And like 77% of those students were not able to do anything but very surface searches and couldn't dig down very deeply. And it was actually, I had been kind of pitching that as true for the last couple of years when I've talked with educators and done professional development related to search. And then that study, which I ran into earlier this year, is pretty clear. In fact, I'll see if I can find a link for that because that's
it's certainly one of these things that's just going to continue to grow in capability. And I remember not very many years ago hearing about some superintendents here in Oklahoma that dictated letters and correspondence to their administrative assistants and who were not using email. And this is within the last 10 years. It may be about 5 or 6 years ago. But I was like flabbergasted, number one, that they weren't on email. And number two, like, who would dictate? Like, that is so old school. And, I like I said, I find myself doing that a lot now. We've said this before on the show, we are becoming cyborgs. Our devices are an extension of our minds. And, it's like keyboarding as well. When we think about what do we need to be doing in school? I mean, learning how to do good iterative searches is definitely a huge skill, and it's not something we should assume people can, have. We still have the myth of the digital native. It's very pervasive. I run into it regularly, and part of that myth is, they know how to research. I mean, knowing how to type google.com or type into your browser Omnibar, does not a digital literate person make. And so I'm interested if you can find that article, maybe put that in the show notes. I'd like to check that out because there are some of these things that we kind of toss around like they're sort of, common knowledge. And we do have experiential encounters with students that reinforce that, but it is interesting to see what researchers are saying about it. And it's relevant in terms of what we are doing in class. We're having a chance at our school now to kind of perhaps reimagine or imagine what computer science should look like, especially for high school, but also for middle school. And I'm really energized by these conversations. We're talking, bigger than just computer science. We're talking about maker ed. We're talking about STEM and what are we doing? And I think that every single computer class at any level needs to be regularly the instructors as well as whoever's writing curriculum need to be looking at what are we doing and how are we changing, because so much is continuing to move forward. I was having pangs of guilt today that playing with media is 5 years old. Oh my gosh, what an ancient text. I got to get that sucker updated. But because part of that idea is that it's not Microsoft Office, it's all these additional things. And so I think that's a hugely important thing for us to model in school, is that digital literacy is continuing to move. And that means that we shouldn't be doing the same sets of projects that we did 5 years ago. We always need to be exploring and iterating, not just because we're on the bleeding edge, but also because being that kind of learner and that kind of a teacher is essential for relevance in the 21st century. So I'm continuing to be interested in that. I'm not, teaching, pre-service teachers at this point, but, continue to try to wonder about, where I'm going to be working in terms of advocacy. My wife and I are kind of be working on this inside and outside sharing stuff, but, it's It's something that I know you've grappled with as you've taught pre-service teachers as well. And, should we be doing the Amazon Echo or the Google Home or whatever Apple's calling their device in school today? Maybe not. I mean, it's a bleeding edge technology, but when we start to imagine what that can do, and we think about it being a useful tool for us in terms of input of information, but especially, being able to have an algorithm perform a complex sequence of things that are useful for us, we need to be moving in that direction. So.
And then I did drop the link that refers to the study. It's from Inside Higher Ed, and it was Illinois Wesleyan University. Of course, I'm just making up. Kent State, maybe it was Purdue, probably Harvard. But there's a citation specifically to that study in the article in chat, and I also threw that in tonight's show notes. And for those of you that are new to the podcast, edtechsr.com, you'll find the weekly show notes, which include links to all the stuff we're talking about tonight.
Awesome.
Okay, so on that topic, the NCCE Tech Savvy Teacher blog is reporting that 2 weeks ago at Google I/O there was a pretty big announcement that I think was it was certainly talked about by the National Android and Chrome Press. That's the nerdiest thing I think I've ever said. But the International Chrome Press.
Which there are thousands, I'm sure.
Thousands of people that sit at home writing about Android. But no offense to Android-loving journalists out there. But I think that the announcement that Android apps will now be available through the Play Store on the Chromebook is maybe the biggest announcement made by Google I/O a few weeks ago. And for those of you that are new to the announcement, and there's a bit of commentary that I put on my blog.ntce.org about what this means or how it could impact schools. But the bottom line is that starting this summer for 3 devices, and then later in the year for another 20 or 25 devices or so, the Play Store, like is available on the Android phone platform, will be available on a Chromebook, which means that without much effort on the part of developers, you can run any Android app on the Chrome platform, which in my humble opinion is a stunning development for the Chromebook. Now, one thing I do feel like I need to say is that, and I've actually been called a Chromebook apologist before a couple of months ago when I was kind of doing some Chrome advocacy, but I am just fine on a Chromebook. I don't have any problem using that platform for 80-90% of what I do on any given day, and maybe even more, actually. And the other secret and very nerdy secret that I've also come to terms with is I'm also a big Linux guy, too. Like tonight, I'm joining you via an Ubuntu Linux laptop that I have. And I dual boot to Windows 10, but I spend most of my time either on a Mac or some sort of Linux-based system, whether it's the Chrome operating system or it's some version of Linux. And the reason why that's important is because the web has become so functional in the past 5 years that really, unless you are using very specialized software, there's really no need to have a full desktop operating system for a good percentage of things that normal people do on a computer. And that said, I'm just fine on that platform, but there are many things that I would say are lacking a bit on the web piece that I would happily use, probably 25 or 30 different applications that would be much, much better if I had the app available as opposed to the web-based version. For example, the thing I'm most excited about, assuming Microsoft doesn't block it, having access to the mobile PowerPoint app, which is an extremely powerful platform. I've been very impressed with what Microsoft's done on the Android and iOS platforms to port their Office system over there. That would be, I think, a very, very great addition to a Chromebook, because then I could work on PowerPoint presentations as opposed to the web-based Office 365, which I don't find nearly as functional or useful. So, and then imagine for a moment if the Chrome interface, I'm sorry, the administrative interface for Google Apps for Education allows you to do the same thing that you have in the past been able to do with like Android devices. And you can pick, for example, 7 or 8 Android applications that just get rolled out onto student or teach Chromebooks as part of that management console that exists for administrators. And you can simply see how a school could put together a suite of 10, 15 applications that go on all these student Chromebooks that would be fabulously functional and may really make that Chromebook that much more powerful of a platform. So I see, Wes, you held up your Chromebook, which you are using to surf on while we're on the show tonight. What does this mean to you that Android apps might be available?
So I just dropped into the show notes a link to an amazing show that's now discontinued, the Chrome show from GigaOM. GigaOM was one, and I think they've tried to relaunch it, but all of their folks kind of went to the four winds. And anyways, Kevin Toffel and I think it's Janko Rutgers, I think I'm saying his name right, did the show, and they're both still awesome to follow. They said over a year ago, their last show was in March of 2015, talking about what Google's grand strategy was for Android and for Chrome, and whether there was a pathway, where the two would meet. I think it was this past fall where we heard the rumor that maybe Chrome was dead, and people were like, what's going to happen? And their Chromebook's dying. And, that was a false rumor. But from a development standpoint, I think it probably makes a lot of sense. Chrome has not had the robust store that has been a huge engine of, innovation and creativity, perhaps income, although I don't know how many people are wealthy today because of apps. I think I need to learn a lot about this, from a personal standpoint. We're a Google Apps for Education school. We've been that way for, I think, about 4 years. We've just ordered some more Chromebooks. We have a number of Chromebook carts now. And one thing I'm energized by, right, is the ability and the opportunity to have students create apps and to create apps myself and to be able to put those on multiple devices. We just had some professors from Oklahoma State University at our school last week who are working with some of our elementary kids actually and doing a little study with using App Inventor, which I have not played with a lot. There's fundamentally different approaches to apps and the curation of apps and the ecosystem that Google has and that Apple has. And I love them both, right? I'm using a new MacBook, the thin one-port version to do this blab show. And here's my Dell Chromebook that I do love, 11-inch. It's the third Chromebook we've bought as a family, and it's my favorite so far. So I drink the Kool-Aid from both sides. I think a robust app environment is beneficial on so many different levels. I know that there are issues in terms of not having content as gate kept, for instance, with objectionable content and things like that, showing up on the store. But I really expect Google to have thought that out and to have addressed that for schools. And I don't know, I haven't read enough about this if it's already there, but I would expect us to see something with Google Apps that's going to allow us to have some kind of curated, whitelisted, app store, and that we're going to be able to approve stuff. And extensions are huge for Chrome. Alone, the Google Tab Suspender, and then, what's the one that I'm using over here? uBlock Origin is the ad blocker that I use. Mm-hmm. These change my life every single day. And it's important that the ecosystem that we're using is robust for developers, that it's friendly, and that it's vibrant. So I'm excited by it. I'm also, the dream that I had and many others in the circa 2009 age, when netbooks came out and we heard about OLPC, the One Laptop Per Child project from MIT, and the promise of one-to-one computing, the devices were not ready at that point for this really small, inexpensive footprint device that could do robust things, not just consume and deliver, but allow for the creation of content. I really think we're there today with the Chromebook, and I'm excited to see this development. So far I don't see any negatives to it. So do you see any downsides from an educational standpoint?
I don't. The only concern I have is that they are limiting which Chromebooks that they're going to roll this functionality out on. And the reason why that's surprising to me is that Chrome had promised that a 5-year support for the for individual hardware Chromebooks that are vetted by them, and they're only supporting, I think, 2-year-old and better, and not even all the 2-year-old ones. And the reason why that's interesting is because the Chromebook Pixel, the original Chromebook Pixel, the super high-end Chromebook from Google, is 3 years old, and they're not supporting it. And that thing is still far and away the second or third most powerful Chromebook ever released. And so it's not even a question of hardware. They seem to be just picking an arbitrary line and saying these will have that functionality to it. But I'll tell you that last year or so, and my Chromebook is a 2014 Dell 11 that I really like a lot. It was pretty expensive for the time. I think it was like $400 in 2014. Now you could buy a much more relatively advanced Chromebook for $400 than you could during that time on the market. But about a year ago or so, I went through the process. You could hand port various Android apps over to the Chrome platform. It was pretty hacky, and it required a lot of clicking that was somewhat cumbersome. But I ported over 4 or 5 apps. They were low function apps. It was like my white noisemaker that I use sometimes when I have to concentrate on a project and that sort of thing. But it was awesome to be able to pull up a little window and have an app available there. And they were nice unitaskers, which I think a good app can oftentimes be. And I just think it's a very, very potentially wonderful thing for schools regarding Chromebooks. I just wish that because I know that especially with a lot of the low-end Chrome apps Android apps requiring no real hardware specs, that some of the slower, older Chromebooks will be included in the list. But other than that, I think this can only be a positive.
Awesome. Well, I'll segue us to my next article because it has to do with coding. Because one of the reasons why I'm excited about this, and I mentioned App Inventor, is in schools, we need to be helping students learn how to, it's the Douglas Rushkoff program or be programmed, how to have agency over the device, not only in creating media, but also in creating algorithms and in understanding that code is created by people. It's not magic, and you can create code. In fact, you need to create code because so many of the jobs of today and the future involve manipulating data, using algorithms. I mean, let's look at meteorology tonight. I mean, most of the severe weather is to the north. My parents up in Manhattan, Kansas had to get in their basement last night because of a tornado. And I think, again, there was something close by. Meteorology is all math, baby. I mean, they're in terms of the modeling and in terms of the ways that they're trying to understand the atmosphere, and so much of understanding the economy and understanding marketing and trends. So much has to do with data, and it has to do with being able to get into code and algorithms and all of this. So the next article I had was from Wired on May 17th. It's titled, "Soon We Won't Program Computers, We'll Train Them Like Dogs." And it's about machine learning. And this is a different approach, which I will give a shout out to my friend Bill Casebeer, who next to you, Jason, one of the smartest people that I call a friend and know personally. Bill has a dual doctorate in cognitive neuroscience and philosophy, and his last assignment at the Air Force was working for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. He now works for Lockheed, I'm sure doing lots of classified stuff. But he was the first one to tell me about machine learning because he was doing research for his doctorate about neural nets and how you train, basically a computer to be able to learn. And so machine learning is different than, what we might think of with coding if we were back in the basic days, or even with Scratch, with block-based, where you drag these blocks in. With machine learning, it is like a neural net, and you're showing it things and giving it feedback. And so you establish a feedback process whereby the computer is able to find out what you like and what you don't, what's positive and what's negative, and receives a lot of inputs. And then over time, essentially writes its own code and then is able to do what you have trained it to do. But what's wild and what this article talks about is, you don't debug these kinds of programs and algorithms in the same way that you debug a PHP or C++ or any other programming language, which, is running a sequential, amount of code. And it really takes us into this AI world and a little bit more of kind of a black box of how things work, because with machine learning, it's going to be a different way of developing algorithms and programming and coding. And it almost may lower the bar in some ways. And it's kind of in the similar way maybe that graphical user interfaces and things like that made different kinds of computing tasks far more accessible to more people, because you didn't have to be writing code and doing that. I mean, certainly not at a zeros and ones level. Not many people ever, have done that ever. But anyway, I think it's pretty interesting. And have you had exposure to machine learning before, Jason? And you have opinions about that or what that's going to mean?
I find it really interesting, and I read a lot about it, but it has yet to really impact me professionally. Other than another person that I work with closely at the Digital Academy is Mike Agustinelli. He's been on the show before. He's kind of one of my partners in crime in projects that I do. And we keep thinking about how, particularly for students that struggle mightily inside of content, that if content can take data and start to adapt itself to individual learners, that the future of learning could be a lot of more individualized instruction, particularly for students that struggle or students that have a lot of struggle that they bring to a particular content, a particular piece. But yeah, there's a lot here, and and as we talked about in the past, it's one of those things where it's obviously going to impact a lot, and it's going to change everything. But the question becomes, how do we embrace it in schools? When is it too much? When is it dangerous? When is it powerful? And I don't think we're really preparing ourselves for these discussions very well. As we talked about before, I know, Wes, that you've read a lot recently about future-looking initiatives on a number of levels that could be both very powerful and troubling. But there's a lot here, and I think it's a very interesting way to go about this process.
And I'll do an encouragement to everybody as a challenge, and I'm taking this on too, to think about ways we can bring people from our local community to interface with our kids to talk about what they're doing with their jobs. And yes, that can be about their reading and their writing, but it can also be about their use of technologies and coding. I mean, somebody the other day was just my parents got a tour of our school when they were here for graduation. And we were talking about 3D printing and dentistry, right? Just about every dental office today is involved in 3D printing, and they can turn some dentures or something for your mouth around in a few days that might have, taken a week or longer. Where are people using coding? Where are algorithms playing into, people's jobs? And helping us get our heads around the importance of this, and that's not just something for over there. That's not just, oh yeah, you go to music and you do it over there. Oh yeah, you come to computer and you do it over here. Literacy, like when do you do literacy? Well, hopefully you do it in all of your classes, because you're at some level talking about communicating and you're talking about expression and all of that. So I think that I'm not saying we need to be doing coding everywhere, but I am saying that it fits into a lot of contexts, and it would be good for us to think creatively about the ways we help everyone, not just students, but teachers and parents as well, recognize, hey, this is hugely important. This is not going to do anything but get more important in the future. And if we want to help our kids be future ready, then we need to have them doing coding at some level. So maybe it will be machine coding, maybe it'll be, something else, but it's something that we need to be passionate about. And I think every school needs advocates for. And if you're listening to our show, and hey, it looks like we have a few other folks joining us live. That's awesome. You could be that person in your community who is the champion for coding and for STEM education, maker education. There's a lot of overlap in this kind of thing, but every school needs that kind of champion, and we certainly don't have a critical mass, a majority of teachers who are embracing that idea today and talking about it, and then bringing the opportunities to the kids. How are we going to help the kids? Let's not wait for the curriculum to change, right? Let's not wait for the textbook to change. Let's figure out how to have a coding club, how to have, science Olympiad that does, activities that involve coding. And as one of our 7th grade teachers was telling me the other day, I mean, let's do something with drones that involves coding. Let's do something with, spheros or other kinds of things, because it's not just like, let's code, but let's do it purposefully, in order to solve a problem and accomplish a task. And, that's where the overlap with STEM is so clear and so exciting.
Okay, great. And then related to that topic, actually all of our topics seem to have dovetailed into each other really well. There was a really great book excerpt that appeared in EdSearch. It was yesterday by Paul Tough, and Paul Tough is the author of the recently released Helping Children Succeed, What Works and Why, and the title of the commentary was Why Grit Can't Be Taught Like Math. And I can give a quick summary of the article, although I would suggest strongly that you read it. But basically the idea is that there's been a lot of conversation, and it's been really, really dominant in the last 6 months, especially at conferences I've been to and as part of Twitter chats I've participated in. There's a lot of question on how we help kids become, a little more tough in the way they approach issues. Grit is sometimes a word. Student agency I've heard used quite a bit. Stick-to-itiveness is another word that I heard earlier this year, but it's a question that's starting to dominate as, students that are given every opportunity in the world to learn, or every pathway in the world to learn, sometimes don't have that kind of grit that's required to fail and then grow and fail and grow and fail and grow, which is starting to become a fairly common refrain about how students can become the kind of advanced, creative, knowledgeable, with it problem solvers we want them to be. But the bottom line of this article, and I've actually purchased this book and I'll be reading it in coming weeks because of what I read here, is that you can't teach grit with lessons. That the only way to really teach grit and to teach students that how to dust themselves off and kind of jump back into problems, even if they're facing challenges, is to provide an environment that allows them to do so. In other words, it's not a lesson you go through. It's not a set of advice you give. It's not a self-help book that students make their way through. You have to put them in an environment where they do have to solve problems, where they have to probably run into failures occasionally. To grow. Like that's the growing process. And the reason why I think that's interesting is because I think that does fit into this broader maker movement. It fits into the broader calls for coding inside the classroom, not in the way oftentimes people think it's a computer science course, but as you were suggesting, Wes, that applies the logarithmic thinking and the way that we develop solutions to problems applies to way more than the computer science field. And what Mr. Tuff is suggesting here is that we need to provide students more opportunities inside of modern schools to experiment and to grow more functional as problem solvers and creative thinkers by putting them in environments that encourages them to do so, because students ultimately are a product of their environment.
So Peggy pointed out that grit is a word some people resist, and that's what I was going to push back a little bit. I'm trying to think of this is a book study we did last summer, which I didn't actually read the whole thing, about growth mindset. Who does growth mindset? So yeah, I think Google it. I think that's Carol Dweck. Yeah. How fast
Carol
can
Dweck.
you Google search? We should give away prizes for people who are seeing us live. So part of the idea there, I think, is that, it's not just about having kids tough it out. It's also about changing our mindset when it comes to grades and when it comes to even student capabilities, and not seeing capabilities and potential as fixed things, but being able to see, kids that, are able to exceed our expectations, and we need to focus on the process and not just the end, grade and all of that kind of stuff. I think it's hugely important that we do encourage grit. One of the things that came up in this conversation maybe 2 weeks ago, when we had some community members as well as folks at our school come together, reimagining computer science and STEM, is this idea that students, in order to develop grit and tenacity, they need time after they fail, to figure out how to solve it and to fix it. And, when do we do that? Because so often, you've got the grade and that's done, but where is the time in the makerspace to, my algorithm didn't work to get my drone where I needed it to come. How do I figure that out? And this is part of reimagining school schedules and reimagining spaces as well, and thinking about student passion and how all of those kind of things can fit in. Because if you're going to develop that kind of grit, you're probably going to be doing it in a project that you personally care about, you have a lot of interest and motivation in, and you have encouragement, but we need to probably address the schedule and the time factor. So this fits into tinkering as well, right? That there's a lot of learning that can happen when we tinker, when we build, when we make. And so if we're going to develop, tenacity and grit, I mean, part of it also, I think of that, we need to do more than get kids motivated to survive the traditional regimen of math and preparation courses that you're going to have to do engineering. I've heard people talk about that as far as grit, being able to, I'm going to make it through these things. At some level, we also need to be reimagining what those classes look like. It's like Olin University, which has reinvented engineering and made it all very project-based. And they don't just have the traditional Calc 1, Physics 1, Chemistry 1, and, the same set of, the canon of education of what we expect people to take and be able to do. So, yeah, I mean, I did not read the article, but I was talking to one of our math teachers just this week who, I don't remember the name of the school. He goes up to the Northeast and he does some really high level stuff on cryptography and helping high schoolers do cryptography and learn about that from a mathematical standpoint. And we were talking about, needing to offer different pathways for math, and how in some respects, I think we do a great disservice when it comes to math. It's almost the easiest thing to teach poorly, because here it is in the book, turn to this page, I'm going to do this algorithm, and then you're going to copy it, versus learning to think and to solve problems and to move outside the algorithm and what's in the problem. Again, that brings in STEM. It's a different way of learning. It's cognitively much more challenging, both for the teacher as well as for the student. And it's hard. It's harder. It is definitely easier to try to, deliver a canned curriculum versus, hey, where are we going to go today? What kind of project are you going to do? How am I going to help you, persist despite difficulties and be able to succeed in whatever it is that you're trying to figure out.
Right. And the one thing I would say is that I think the point of I think that it kind of leads back to that at the bottom of that commentary from EdSurge, that part of the point here is to throw kids in an environment that does encourage them to do so. In other words, that's where I kind of thought makerspaces when I first read the article, because there was this notion that we can't really build skills, problem solving, that sort of thing into kids unless we give them the opportunity to really do so outside of those traditional boxes. Although I will say that you mentioned engineering as an example of this, but I think there's a lot of content areas where and actually, there's another article I was going to throw in this week, and it's too big and too nebulous to kind of really do here without me thinking about it a little bit. But there was a big article earlier this week where the author was talking about how the work needs to change, right? Like that the technology really hasn't led to the disruption they would expect it to outside of a handful of industries. And one of the reasons why is because we haven't really allowed technology to come in and really disrupt work. In other words, the notion that we are keeping humans in a lot of jobs they don't really need to be in. And then my brain started going all sorts of places. And one of the places it went actually was, we talk about the lack of jobs in a technologically developed world, and I think that's an opportunity to actually expand the number of teachers in the world. One of the things we don't come to really reality with talking about some of the new and evolutionary ways to look at classrooms is that a maker classroom or an individualized classroom or a personalized classroom, I don't care what term or perspective you look at from, if in its best interpretation, it requires a lot more teachers to make that happen. And in fact, that's what I wish on schools, that, to make these dreams happen, we're going to need a lot more talented teachers, a lot more experts, a lot more facilitators, and teachers of all ilk, and in all perspectives and in all ways and philosophies in order to make that happen. And one of the ways we could, perhaps evolve our labor force is to say there's lots of jobs that probably won't exist anymore in a really substantially disrupted economy. So why don't we start thinking about how we can turn that into, doubling and tripling our teacher force in 2020, 2025, 2035, and use that to, kind of invest back into the humans of the future. And so that's a way out there, and a big cloud of argument and thought, but that's where my mind keeps going when I read articles as such.
Absolutely. And it's huge that we think about what is learning, right? It is not the delivery of content. And if it was, then we would just all be online and everyone would thrive. And you're probably, better qualified than 99% of the people out there to speak to that it's not going to be for everybody. And it's not just going to be magical that, suddenly you have an online opportunity and you're golden. You have everything you need. There's so many other factors at play. Relationships are key, accountability, but just also differentiating and knowing that, people are different. And yes, we can have technology tools that can help us differentiate better, but it doesn't mean that we can just, hand somebody a screen and say, see you 12 years, when you've got what you want. Peggy put a question in that I'll toss to you, Jason. What do you think about the idea that makerspace is really about mindset rather than actual space?
True. There
you go.
Yeah, and I would say that couldn't be more true, and I think that especially the earlier advocates, when the make movement was really getting started in late 2000s, 2007, 8, 9, the evolution of the Maker magazine, the Maker blog, and all the kind of things that went along with that. I think that's really what they were going for, is they want people to feel empowered to create solutions that are not that involve human ingenuity and I guess a little bit of stick-to-itiveness, if you will, that you can build and rebuild and engage in a scientific process in small ways. And I think absolutely true. Yep.
DIY, philosophy. However, I will say sometimes we also will hear people say, well, the technology doesn't matter. It's not about the technology. Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation today if we didn't have the technology, right? If we didn't have the internet connectivity and the devices, this is transformative. We're having a transformative conversation, and Peggy's asking us questions from Arizona, and I'm not sure where our EdTech theater. Who is that? Actually, I'll have to take a look and give.
It's Nick Cusimano, and your comment is couldn't be more true. That
awesome, Nick.
The theater space is it's been Maker for as long as I've been involved, which was mostly 25 years ago in high school, but still, so true.
Yeah, but I will say this: space matters, and having had the privilege a few weeks ago to listen almost all day to David Jakes, who worked for the Third Teacher and is really into learning spaces, talk about how our expectations are just different when we move into different spaces. It's one of the reasons why sometimes it's important to take kids out of their regular classroom, because they have all kinds of ideas about the way they're supposed to behave and the way the learning happens and just the way things roll, in a particular space. And so, yes, while it is a mindset and a philosophy, and you don't have to have a maker space to have a maker school and to be a maker, right? It's really a decision that you make in terms of embracing a philosophy. It does make a huge difference. In fact, my wife, I don't know if we'll get to record this podcast tonight, but her kids have been so fired up to go back to their maker space this last week of school. And it's not magical. There's all kinds of things they've done in order to build the culture around making, but having a space where they can get messy and they have all this stuff out and they have these resources and these things to build with and to make with, it definitely does make a difference. So is it okay if I take us to my next article?
Yeah, go
All
ahead.
right, I'll do this one kind of quick, but I thought it was interesting. This is titled "Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway buys $1 billion of Apple stock." We've definitely, bantered back and forth about, talking Amazon, Google, and Apple, and Apple is an innovation company, and it's good. I mean, I was the Apple fan before it was cool to be the Apple fan, right? Back in the mid '90s, and I wish I had some actual Apple stock at that time. I wish I had just hung on to it, but we're not seeing anybody today that's a major player. Even Microsoft, I wouldn't count out of the game in terms of innovation and what they're doing. So. Yeah, I don't have lots of extra funds to be able to buy Apple stock, but if Warren Buffett thinks it's a good idea, probably is. And I would say that bodes well for schools, because we're going to continue to see Apple, that's a major player, as well as Google, innovate in the space. And competition in this context is a very positive thing, and it leads to more choices for us. So did you have a local flood or a cat emergency or something that required you to move?
I power.
Oh,
so,
Electricity. Yes.
Yeah.
I've got 18%, but I think I'm going to be good till the end.
I think that there's been a lot of hand wringing the last 6 weeks about the drop in Apple stock, and then there's the annual is Apple dead rumors and that sort of crap. They're no better or worse off than Google or Microsoft or any other tech innovation company. It's going to come and go. I think we're in a tech bubble right now. I mean, I think that's very true. And I should say that officially I do, I own a lot by number of different companies, not a lot of, but I own Google stock and Apple stock. And I suppose I'm in a journalist context here, or commentary context here. So full disclosure, I own some tech stocks, because I'm apparently a major player in the stock market. But the notion is that that most of the innovation that has happened that's really disrupting right now technology has come from Apple. So I think that's a smart move on Warren Buffett's part, and is definitely a true piece of that process. And it's an exciting time, I think, to watch what's going to happen next. You did see that there's a rumor that there are new thinner touchscreen MacBook Pros that are on the way this summer. That's the latest rumor.
Oh, nope, I did not see that. So we're not actually refreshing this year Mac laptops. We've got over 90% of our teachers with Mac laptops. And that's going to be an interesting refresh when we do, because there's these different choices, right, as far as the form factor or even iPad Pro and what we go with. So that's interesting. Well, you want to do us one more article and then maybe Geeks of the Week?
Yeah, this one's a really quick one, mostly because it's entertaining. But there was a report out this week that said that the U.S. nuclear missile silos are running on systems that include 8-inch floppy disk drives.
8-inch?
And so we're talking about, for those of you that are not like old school geeks, there was kind of 3 levels of floppy disk. There was the 8-inch floppy disk, which was a big old floppy disk. There was the 5 1/4-inch floppy disk, which is when I got into computers in the mid 80s. That was replaced by the much more compact 3.5-inch floppy disk, which was then replaced by the disappearance of the floppy disk because it was no longer that particularly useful. I guess probably the closest
CDs, I think.
CDs, I guess, and then the closest thing that exists today that's related to that is the USB
It was
drive.
The zip drive, baby. Remember a 100 meg zip drive? You thought you were the king with that. I did.
Zip. Then the Jazz drive from iOmega. You may remember that.
I've got a zip drive in my garage right over here, probably with data that I'll never get off. Because who can plug in a SCSI anymore? No one.
I know, no kidding. So that's an interesting development, and that the fact that, and the reason why I think this is really funny is that I bet you $1 that there are some districts around, probably that are not using 8-inch floppy disk, but I talked with some folks before that, for example, had an old mainframe computer that's running the check writing software that they purchased in 1986. And, it still is interfacing, it's still writing checks. They have to order off to get the right ribbon for the printer that does the check printing, yada, yada, yada. But I thought that was an interesting phenomenon. Wes, I never told you this, but my friend Mike taught at a middle school in Helena that recently had a 50-year employee retire. He was a teacher in the district, and he left behind a working lab of Apple IIe's that were still up and running. Entire lab full of Apple IIe's that he had.
Oregon Trail, baby, so. Oregon Trail. Whoa, yep. That's a serious. That's like a functional time capsule. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Very much so.
There's a example of the ROI of Apple technology, right? How many years did they get out of that investment? That's amazing.
Yeah, very much so.
Cool. All right. We want to do well, we just about got it. I moved my last article to inspiration for Geek of the Week, so.
Okay. Well, let me start with mine. It's really quick. One more thing from Google I/O that's interesting. Google will release their modular cell phone in the next year, first to developers and then to consumers. It's Project Ara from Google, and it will be a cell phone that allows you to create something like a desktop machine, and then you can switch parts in and out of the cell phone so that you can create what's important to you inside the cell phone package. And the reason why that I think this is so interesting is because I have always thought personally, and this is something that Apple's gotten right, because they've not been super hyper on the iPhone about cranking up the resolution like Android phones have been, which I think saves on battery life. And that's what my greatest wish would be, is that a fast, modern Android phone with a relatively low resolution screen to save on battery life. So what I'm hoping to do is at some point be able to put together a Project Ara cell phone from Google that maxes out on RAM, that maxes out on storage space, that maxes out on processor, but has a nice low resolution screen. 720p would be just fine for me, that I could utilize to have great battery life and a fast, responsive phone. So Project Ara coming soon from our friends at Google.
Awesome. And my Geek of the Week is the National Week of Making is coming up June 17th through the 23rd, 2016. You can find out about that on weekofmaking.org. The reason I found out about that is because I actually nominated my wife to be a White House champion for change for making. We learned about this flying back from Chicago. There's like over 400 people nominated. They're picking 10. So she's probably not going to be selected, but it will be kind of cool because we learned about it on the flight. The deadline was going to be after we landed. So I had to buy Wi-Fi on the flight and then, wrote the nomination paragraphs there. But hey, whether or not she is, we all need to be champions for change in our community. And this National Week of Making is pretty cool. It's, whatever you think of our president, I'm very, very happy that we're having an emphasis on STEM education, coding, and making. And President Obama has definitely done, I think, some great advocacy, visible advocacy on that. And I put a related inspiration. I just saw this article today and then listened to almost the whole podcast. I'm going to finish listening to it right tomorrow. It's in EdSurge. The maker movement isn't just about making and electronics. And that was an interview with Mitch Resnick, who is one of the godfathers of coding and at the MIT Media Lab and the Lifelong Kindergarten Group, and definitely, I think, one of the most important voices for educational change overall, and particularly as it pertains to coding, making, and the imagination loop, and trying to make school more engaging and worthwhile. In a good kindergarten class, you're going to have lots of making, lots of choice, lots of collaboration. That's what the Lifelong Kindergarten Group wants to promote. So we can maybe do our part of promoting more awareness about making by hosting some kind of an event or just telling people about the National Week of Making, and then making something, right? Make it and share it. Even that small little act is a positive and potentially powerful thing for ourselves and for others.
Great. Thanks, Wes. So Let's go ahead and shut her down. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 11. We're glad you could join us tonight. You can find tonight's links at edtechsr.com/links, where you can also find past episodes of the podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. You can subscribe to us on wherever you aggregate finer podcast in your life. And we're also on the name of the podcast app that I submitted to a couple weeks ago that
Stitcher,
I forgot.
Stitcher.
There we go. You can find us on Stitcher. If you're so inclined, go ahead and review us on iTunes. That helps us get out to more people. Same's true giving us the thumbs up in Stitcher, or if you are on any podcast app where there's a rating involved, please feel free to let others know about our little podcast. So my name is Jason Neifer. I'm the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And Wes, close us out.
All right. And I am wearing my Thunder shirt. I've been monitoring the game. There's 5 minutes left, and it looks like the Thunder may lose. So if it's taken to the next game, I have to well, we've figured out how to get the game for the groom in our chapel. So anyway, excitement here in Oklahoma City. I do live in Oklahoma City. I am W Fryer on Twitter. You can find my blog at speedofcreativity.org, and I am hopefully continuing to be a learner and a maker, and enjoying teaching in different contexts, even though I'm a tech director now. And I'm actually looking forward this summer to a Minecraft camp, which sold out, or not sold out, it filled up in record time, working with a local nonprofit promoting coding. And so we're doing a Minecraft challenge day. And yes, Minecraft is like dynamite when you talk to kids about it. So my daughter, now that school is out, is probably going to spend, our youngest, an inordinate amount of time playing Minecraft, and I will voluntarily be roped into some of that as well. So thank you all for tuning in. We are normally here on Wednesday nights, and we will hopefully be back on Wednesday night, but you know what? Life intervenes sometimes, and they're not paying us any more or less, depending on the day of the week or how frequently we're doing this. So we appreciate you being here, and encourage you to share the show, and definitely give us feedback. Thanks to all the feedback that we got tonight from Peggy and from Nick, and we would love to hear from you. So reach out to us on Twitter or another way, and we will try to integrate whatever ideas or suggestions you have into a future show. Thanks.
Okay.